fashion isn't just something we put on, and it's not just about comfort, it's not just about the way we look. For a lot of people, they've never ever experienced it. So seeing it in the flesh for the first time, seeing how it made someone feel putting something on that actually was the right length was, very humbling and a relief and quite exciting.
Chamiah, welcome to Disabled and Proud. How are you today?
I'm really well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm honestly so looking forward to this conversation because I think fashion industry, the whole thing needs to change, and you're someone who is going out there and making that change. So I'm so excited to hear all about what you do and your company. I'm so looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. I always love getting the chance to chat about what I do and to meet new people and spread awareness of things that lots of people don't consider. So I'm really excited to just get stuck in.
Yeah. So usually the first question that I would ask any guest is how they refer to their disability. But today, this is different. And actually, I'm kind of loving it. But my first question that I am going to ask you is, how is disability present in your life?
So I'm surrounded by people that have disabilities in different forms. I'm surrounded by a lot of people with neurodiversity. So I grew up and I've got 5 younger siblings, and 4/5 of them we think, 4 of them are neurodivergent. 1 of them we think possibly could be as well. So that's potentially all 5 of my siblings are on the spectrum in some way, some capacity. So that was interesting. So that's always been in my life, and I'm the oldest, so I'm like a second parent. So my mum's an only single mum. So in that sense, was very much ingrained in my life and everything I did. We also do think that my mum's probably on the spectrum as well, which probably isn't surprising given that there's so many siblings who are on the spectrum.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if there's 6 of you, that is a lot.
But interestingly, I don't seem to show any signs.
Interesting. Very interesting. Especially how women present in neurodivergence compared to men as well, because obviously the traits are incredibly different between women and men. So that is interesting. And quite a lot of people have I think there is a big argument for it being actually hereditary. So that is so interesting.
Yeah. So in that sense, that's always been part of my life. And especially with one of my brothers, that presents physically as well. Because he's a tiptoe walker. His body has just developed in a very different way, and his feet have developed in a different way, and he now has to use a wheelchair some of the time and things like that. So are those aspects as well. But I got into this really through meeting a young person who had dwarfism, and just learning lots and lots about dwarfism as a condition, and then just getting really curious, and then thinking, well, if this young person struggles to find clothing, then that must mean that a lot of other people are struggling, and that there must be a whole community of people that don't have clothes. And then that has just really developed. And so now I have a clothing brand called Dewey, and we make clothing for people under 5 foot. And so it means that I'm constantly surrounded by disabled people in all different capacities. And interestingly, my birthday is December the 3rd, which is obviously, as we know, I can't remember what they call it. It's like International Day of Persons with Disabilities or something, isn't it?
Yeah, IDDP, International Day for Disabled People or Disability Persons.
Yeah, something like that. But yeah, that's a funny coincidence as well. So
that is wild. I love that though, because that's almost like a little bit of, fate showing its hand. Like you were born on this date, and this is also quite an important date for the disabled community. So, I love that. I know, that's so fun.
It is fascinating. But yeah, so I'm not a disabled person, and to my knowledge, I'm also not neurodiverse, but I'm just surrounded by this community, and it's a lovely community to be part of and to be an ally of.
Yeah, and I think this is such an interesting one for me, because obviously we're talking about allyship today, which, it can be quite often people see it as performative, but then there are people like you who are actually going out there and making a change, and it's that change and putting yourself on the line to make that change. You know, you've created a company, a business, which literally has allyship at its heart. And like, you're putting your name and your business on the front line to also, you know, hold our hands and prove the point that these things should be considered, but they're not. And actually, from that, you're then creating a successful business from it. But actually, let's talk about Dewey. And where, obviously, you said that it came from an encounter that you had with someone with dwarfism and learning all about dwarfism. And I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit. So how did you get into fashion in the first place?
Yeah, so in terms of getting into fashion, I always wanted to be a fashion designer from like a really young age. I've always been quite fortunate to be one of those people that always knew what they wanted to do. And as I was growing up, my thought process was that I wanted to have a clothing brand that made women feel great and that accentuated women's bodies and made them feel really confident in their bodies. Because for me, that's what clothing does. That depending what you wear, whether you love, I don't know, wearing trackies and you wear matching trackies all the time and that's what makes you feel good, and you love comfort, or whether you love wearing things that do accentuate your figure and show things off, or whatever it is, I do think clothing personally makes a real difference to how we present ourselves. And I know that if I don't know, throw on a blazer, that I'm going out to face the day in a completely different way than if I throw on a jumper, for example. They're two completely different vibes and you act very differently. So I always wanted to do something that made women feel great. That was something I was really passionate about. And then it was really interesting how it happened, actually, because I got into London College of Fashion, which was like my dream uni when I was younger. Someone had told me about it when I was about 12 and I was like, right, that's where I'm going to go. That's the uni.
Eyes on the prize. Yeah. That's where I'm going.
I think it's just the name of it as well. London College of Fashion just sounded really good. And it was 2018, so it was the year that I was just about to go to uni. And I used to work on a programme called NCS, which, for anyone that doesn't know, is essentially a government-funded programme, and young people go away and they do activities. It's a bit like Camp America vibe. So we do like crazy things like high ropes and surfing and really fun stuff, and then we also do charity work and we learn about different things. And I'd worked on this a few times, but in this particular year, in roughly, let's say, July, August time, so just before I went off to uni in September, there was a young person in my group who had dwarfism. So I was the team leader. So I was the person that was in charge of making sure that she felt safe and that she felt that she could access everything that she needed and that she didn't feel left out at any moment, and that she really enjoyed herself. And of course, all the other young people as well. But just due to the nature of her condition, I spent a lot of time with her. Especially when there were moments where perhaps there was an activity that she didn't want to do or that wasn't accessible. I was the one that then we would kind of sit and chat. And that's how I learned so much, really, that she just was one of those people that was really, really open, just taught me lots of stuff without even needing to ask questions. She just kind of was a very chatty person. And I just got really curious and I just thought, well, I wonder where she buys her clothes from. And then did some Googling and found that there wasn't really anything. There was one company at the time and the stuff they were offering was really expensive. It was really basic. And when I say basic, I mean like a pair of trousers would literally be like an elasticated waistband and like a straight leg in just like a block colour. Like it was just very functional, but not fashionable at all. And I just thought, like, she's like a 16-year-old girl, I think she was. She wants to look like her friends. She already stands out because she's small. And I know that she already struggles with people staring and things like that. So what, in my mind, she really would have benefited from, and I'm sure she would have appreciated, was clothing that fit, that looked like her friends, that was comfortable, that made her feel good. So that I always think, even if people are going to stare, because they will, at least if you feel great in yourself, that's one less thing to worry about. Whereas if you also feel a bit naff and your clothes don't really fit properly, and in our customer's case, I don't know, perhaps you've had to roll up the sleeves, or perhaps you've had to buy it in the children's section, at least then you're not conscious people are looking at that aspect. So yeah, that's how I got into it, and then went off to uni and started a business, and here I am 3 years later, 3 years deep into Dewey.
I love what you said about people are going to stare anyway, because I think that's something that we really, like, we don't always think about, but people are going to stare regardless. And I actually remember Sam Rank saying, I always know people are staring at me, so I want to look good enough that people are going to stare at something rather than just staring at me for the sake of my disability. I want them to stare at me for how I dress and how I present myself. And actually, I think as women, or, you know, femme presenting people, that is something that can be not for everybody, but can be quite important. And actually, I think you make such a valuable point when you said, you know, you want to be looking like your friends, particularly if you are short stature, because, you know, the choices are really quite limited. I mean, I did a bit of Googling as well before this, thinking like, okay, where would I buy my clothes? And I asked a couple of my friends, like, you know, who are wheelchair users, who are smaller. And they all said we either get it from the children's section, or we kind of buy average size and then have to like makeshift and tie it back with hairpins and sort it out with bobbles and actually just make it fit us, rather than actually just having like a brand that fits us. And I think that's exactly what Dewey does. And with Dewey, did you, when you were like formulating this idea in your head of what the brand would be and what the brand would stand for and what the brand does, did you face any barriers to access with that?
So in terms of community-wise, because I know lots of people are curious of how people took it, that I'm average height, I'm relatively small, I'm 5'2", but I'm not short stature. And
that's like me, I'm 5'3", and I always say I'm 5 foot and a fluff.
Yeah, I know. And I used to always feel very small, but of course now I don't at all. And I really appreciate my height and the fact that I don't struggle with clothing and I don't struggle with some of those things. So in terms of community-wise, no, it's always been really, really positive, and people have just... I feel like in general the disabled community are very welcoming anyway, and that if they can see someone's doing something from a good place, they're going to just welcome them in. They're not going to be like, no, you shouldn't be doing this because you're not one of us. Because as we all know, disability will affect people in different ways, and it can affect people at different times of their life as well. It's a non-discriminatory thing. So community-wise, no. But in terms of like research-wise and funding-wise, all of that was really tricky, definitely. And the hardest part of it was that short stature conditions really haven't been that well researched. And even looking at just dwarfism, because that's what I started with, there isn't one specialist in the whole world in dwarfism. There's just not one. So people with dwarfism will see lots of different doctors and surgeons and whatnot, and they'll go to someone for, I don't know, someone who specialises in bones, and then they'll go to someone who specialises in the spine, let's say, someone who specialises in this, this and this. But there's not one specialist ever, like anywhere. This never existed, which is crazy to me. So in that sense, the research was really hard. It took a really long time. And of course, if I was going to go out there and start a clothing brand for average height people, there are size charts everywhere. There's lots of information about pattern making and how to actually make clothes. But of course, I'm starting this as kind of one of the first ever. So the information's not there. So it's just taken a lot of trial and error. So yeah, in that sense, the access wasn't great in the beginning. And it's still a bit of an uphill battle sometimes of just trying to capture that data and understand it and look at things from a bird's eye point of view. But we've made it work.
Yeah. I found it really interesting about size charts that it just doesn't exist. And I was wondering, as a clothes company, I was obviously like, you have to sell clothes in sizes. How have you formulated a size chart that works for your company, but also for your customers? Because how obviously, like, as average people, average size people, I'm not even sure average is the right term, because what is average anyway? We can kind of figure out what our sizing is just based on like where we are in like the charts of the world, really. Like, we all know that an 8 in the UK is probably like a 4 in the US, so we can kind of gauge ourselves. But how have you kind of gone about creating that? Was there focus groups, or was it just like a lot of trial and error, as you said?
So in the beginning, it's developed a little bit. So in the beginning, I took some data from, I think it was about 25 people, 25 women with dwarfism, and predominantly the most common form, which is called achondroplasia. So that's the form that someone like Ellie Simmons has, or Peter Dinklage. That's kind of what you imagine someone with dwarfism looks like as such. That's achondroplasia. So about 25 people, and I took 23 measurements from each of them. Everything from like the neck circumference and the head circumference to arm length, leg length, hip, bust, waist, all of those. And I developed a size chart from that, looking at size charts that were currently out there, how they were formulated in terms of the small, medium, large, and then kind of made my own. Has developed since then, and I've taken data from a lot more people now. It's now in the hundreds instead of just 25, and it's also from masculine and feminine women as well, and different conditions as well, because as Dewey's developed, I hit a point in the end of 2022 when we'd done Fashion Week, we'd gone viral, and there were so many comments of people that were like, oh, I'm 4'7" and I really struggle, but I don't have dwarfism, can I still buy? Or you'd even be surprised how many people are like 4'11", like they're just on that cusp, and they also don't fit into petite ranges. So that's where it's really developed. So now essentially we have a size chart that's in the small, medium, large format. Of course, that will expand with time. And we offer different leg and sleeve lengths, because that really, if we simplify everything down, that's the biggest issue, is that, like you've said, you've spoken to friends, lots of them can buy kind of the average size clothing, but they'll have to chop it or roll it or go to a seamstress to get it shorter. The main issue really is the leg length and sleeve length, and across the different disabilities, because if you compared, I don't know, let's say dwarfism with brittle bone, they present quite differently and they have quite different proportions. However, you might have two people who could wear a medium, let's say, but the person with brittle bone potentially has longer arms than the person with dwarfism, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it works. So say, for example, you could go on the website and say, I'm going to buy a medium pair of trousers, but I'm going to get them in the long leg length because I'm a bit taller. I'm on the taller side of short stature. And then again, equally, you could say I'm going to get a large, but I'm going to actually get the short leg because I've actually got quite small legs for someone of short stature. So that's how it works now. It does take people a minute to get their head around, but I'm really passionate about making it easy. I didn't want to do bespoke for everyone because, one, that costs a lot, it takes time. A lot of people don't really want bespoke, they want what their friends have. So what I'm trying to do is just make it easy, that they can say, right, I know my leg length, I know I'm a medium roughly, I can just go and buy that instead of going through the hassle of bespoke and taking all your measurements and stuff like that.
And I think what you say about bespoke is really true, is that people actually always want bespoke items because it's super expensive, but also bespoke doesn't always fit in with the zeitgeist, and quite often, or at least what I found, and I feel like I can say this from having these conversations, quite often, more often than not, people with disabilities just want to fit in when it comes to fashion, because there's not always the options to, like you said, the options aren't always there. And actually, if we have clothes that are designed a bit more for us and where we can feel like we're, part of a society that quite often doesn't want us to be there, then that's wonderful. And I find that, you've had to essentially create your own sizing chart is absolutely phenomenal, because that is a lot of time and a lot of effort. Like, the sizing charts that we have now have been around for like however long, and they, they've changed as, humans have got larger, and I don't mean taller, I mean like waistlines have got bigger, because that is what's happened. Like, there's no arguments about that. A vintage 8 is not the same as an 8 today.
They're so different.
Yeah, they're so different. And so the fact that you've gone out there and then you have from scratch created your own sizing chart is incredible. And like, that's phenomenal. And for the community that you're like essentially you're supporting and underpinning, that's invaluable, because a lot of people wouldn't have had that knowledge where they're like, where their sizing is, had you not created that. And I think that in itself is a brilliant feat to be able to say that you've done.
Yeah, it's really interesting as well, because I find myself, this is going to possibly sound wrong because I'm a non-disabled person, but this is not how I mean it, and I'll explain. Sometimes I find myself educating short stature people about their own bodies, because they don't even know. Yeah. So, for example, one thing that a lot of people don't know who are short stature, but they experience, is that from their shoulder to their bust point is shorter than the rest of us, typically. So a lot of people think, short stature people have the same torso, they just have short legs and short arms. That's not quite the case. While their torso might be the same length, there are different proportions. So then I'll have conversations with people where we'll talk about clothing, and I'll explain, look, this is designed like this, and did you know that your bust to shoulder point is actually shorter? And then they'll, most of the time, I say 9 times out of 10 will be like, oh my goodness, I've always struggled with bra straps and top straps, and I didn't know that's why. So I find myself a lot of the time explaining people's conditions to themselves. And I think sometimes, and I'm sure you probably have learned this as well, that for some people they will deny their conditions for a really long time. So then they won't learn anything about it. They don't want to know any of the facts, or they don't want to know. So then when they start to become comfortable with it, and I've seen it with some of my close friends that I've kind of taken on this journey from the beginning of being in that space of kind of denial or discomfort with their condition, to becoming quite comfortable and then being open to learning. I find that I spend a lot of time explaining things like that to people, which I think is invaluable in itself, for someone to just know, well, that's why I struggle with this thing, or I thought that was just me, that something was wrong with me. And when you say, actually, no, this is the same for millions of people, it can be really reassuring for a lot of people.
But actually, I really like that, because it ties into what you said about there not being an expert. Because if this expertise doesn't exist, then how are people going to find out this information? Because as we all know, if you are disabled, you don't get a handbook. There is no handbook that says like, welcome to the club. If you find this problem, go to subsection C. Like, that doesn't exist. And also, because disability is so individual, it would be, as soon as you printed that handbook, it would be out of date, because it wouldn't make any sense for anybody else. So actually, for you to have that knowledge and then to be able to pass that on, all right, you might not be short stature yourself, you might not have dwarfism, but you know that information because actually you've gone out there and you've collated that, and you can be like, actually, like, you're one of quite a few people that I've seen, and like, this is just how it is, but actually this is how we help you move forward. I think that's really invaluable.
And I've definitely learned to be a really good listener as well. That I think that's one of the biggest things I've learned in the past 3 years, that you really just have to listen to people and just give them space to speak, and give them space to share their own experiences. And if they're not ready, then that's fine. But instead of asking too many questions, or I don't know, whatever it is, I think listening has been one of the most invaluable pieces. Is just, that's what people want as well. A lot of people at some of the time just want someone to just talk to, who's just going to listen, who's just going to take in that information and then do something with it. I think that's a lot of what I'm having to do, is just listen to what people want, listen to what people need, and then go and do something with that, instead of either guessing or assuming or asking questions all the time. It's just immersing yourself so fully in the community, which I completely am. I don't think I really even speak to that many people now who aren't disabled or and I just spend so much time learning, so that then I can take it away and do something with it.
And I love that as well, because you, like you said, you've basically immersed yourself in a community that you otherwise probably wouldn't have anything to do with, had you not had that interaction with that young girl whilst you were, being her team leader. I was wondering, because that was before uni, and you were like formulating this idea in your head, and you went to uni, and did you ever present this idea to like people at uni, and what was the reaction if you did?
So I think once I'd met that young person, I'd done some Googling, I had that light bulb moment. It was always going to be something I was going to explore. I think I was in my second year at uni, possibly, when I first really looked into it. And I did a project. We had to do we were doing like a collaboration project with Urban Outfitters. And the whole project was around marginalised communities and could we create a collection that spoke to that? So we had different options. One of them was disability, another was, I think, gender, sexuality, possibly. There are a couple of different ones. Of course, I chose disability, and I said, look, I'm going to see if I can make clothing that would fit an average height person as well as a little person. And I explored that, and that was a pretty successful collection. And that was actually the first time I really spoke to people online who had dwarfism and worked with them on it. So I was already building friendships at that point. I think my tutors always loved what I did, that they were always very supportive. Luckily, because I know that's not the case for everyone, they were really, really supportive. However, obviously they didn't have the knowledge to tell me, so I was still learning a lot of it on my own. So as much as they were like, this is amazing, we love your idea, you should definitely do it, they weren't necessarily the people I could go to say, I don't even know how to structure this, because we get given kind of pattern pieces, which for anyone that doesn't know fashion, the pattern piece is basically like a 2D version of the clothing that you kind of sew together at the seams. And we get given a women's size 12, I think it is, because that's the average. Although we know average is a funny word. But yeah, they were really, really supportive. And after that second year, I went into my third year, which for lots of people is a placement year. And I just could not get a placement in the industry. It was impossible. And I wasn't financially in a place to work for free. So what I ended up doing was I did an enterprise placement instead, which was at the uni. So I didn't have to go and work for free. It was once every 2 weeks. So it meant that I could work full time. So pretty much for that year, I worked full time as a learning support assistant in a school. So I was even more immersed with disability and neurodivergence at the same time. And I developed Dewey in that year. So that's when I could kind of take this concept and really get into the nitty gritty of what that looked like, what our mission was going to be, what the branding would look like, who the customer really was. And that's when I did all of that size chart research, and I did some sampling. And then after that year, going into my final year at uni, was like, well, I'm not going to just stop now. That seems silly. I'm just going to carry on. So then it just has carried on. And then as soon as I graduated, it was like, it just carried on. It just flowed. I didn't have time off. And lots of people kind of finish uni and have a bit of a breakdown of like, what am I going to do in my life? Whereas mine it just kept going. I just kept on designing and kept growing Dewey to the place it is now.
Yeah. What was it like for you when you saw your first garment like on someone and it was like, it was the final prototype and it was finally on someone and you could see them wearing it and you could see that it fit? What was that feeling like?
I think it's so surreal. There was like a couple of different points that's happened, but seeing it in person was different. Of course, when I was developing my brand was 2020, so it was kind of still in and out of lockdown, so a lot of stuff was virtual. But when I got to see it in person, it's a really weird feeling, because I'd worked on these things for, I don't know, let's say a year at this point, and it's kind of my living, breathing thought. It's all I do. I would go to work at the school 9 to 5, I would come home, and then from, let's say, 5 to 10 or 11 at night, I would be working on this. So it was like a relief as well. I think there was a lot of relief there that, oh my God, it fits. Thank God, because I've been working on this for a long time. And I don't think I appreciated at the time how much that could impact someone's life. Because obviously for me, this is my job. This is something I'm passionate about and I believe in, but I'm not the person that's experiencing it. I'm not the customer. And I do appreciate it much more now. But I think seeing people be so shocked that something fit and that they didn't have to roll the arms up was a really like humbling experience, and it's something that when I describe what I do and I'm trying to get across the impact that it has, and to say to people that fashion isn't just something we put on, and it's not just about comfort, it's not just about the way we look. For a lot of people, they've never ever experienced it. So seeing it in the flesh for the first time, seeing how it made someone feel putting something on that actually was the right length, was very humbling and a relief, and quite exciting, because at that point I was like, right, now I know it fits, now I know that this can work, and now I've seen the impact it can have. It kind of motivated me more and more. And I think every time I see people in person and I'm able to do things like pop-up shops and conventions and meetups, it's always a nice thing to kind of like fill your cup back up of like why it's so important, and actually how much it can do for people's lives to just wear clothes that fits. It's just something that lots of us take for granted.
Yeah. I love what you said about it filling up your cup, but also about what you said, relief, about how you're like, oh God, like it actually fits. Like my time has not been wasted.
Honestly, like I spent so many hours. I always think if I could go back and look at how many hours I must have spent. I mean, day to day now is still crazy, but how many hours I would spend after work and just everything. Yeah, I think it was a huge relief just to see, thank God it fits. I can continue. It's not like I need to go back to the drawing board, and it's not like this doesn't work or it wasn't useful. It was a good relief of like, we can carry on.
Yeah. And also like that's important for you, because obviously you've put time and effort into it, like, and what I love is that, you know, in your your final year of uni, sorry, not your third year, it was very much like, okay, I've been doing this now for a year and I'm going to push forward with this, and I love this idea, and hopefully it's going to work. And then you see your pieces in the flesh and you're like, oh my gosh, all of this hard work and this time was super important. So let's fast forward a bit now. So you've done uni, Dewey's up and running, London Fashion Week. Let's talk about that. How did that come about?
So it was an actual crazy whirlwind. So I graduated uni, and then, so that was in, I think, June, let's say. And then I was part of this competition called dbas, which is basically a competition for social entrepreneurs. And if you won it, you won some money. And I won £15,000. And this was just after I graduated. So
perfect timing.
I know. And also when I graduated, of course, my main thing was like, right, I've got this brand and I know that I want to keep it going, but I don't have any money. So what am I going to do? And this came, of course, at the best time, because it was like, right, that means I can pay myself the tiniest amount just to kind of keep afloat, and we can keep going. And I'd seen that there's this company called London Represents, which I'm sure you've probably seen at some point. And they essentially put on inclusive fashion shows in Fashion Week. And I then had the funding from this competition to do it. So I signed up without a plan, really. I had, I think, 3 garments ready, and I needed 10. Or I needed 10 looks, let's say, and I had 3 looks ready. So you might think, right, that's like, I don't know, it could be another 7 garments, but it's not really, because if you think, I don't know, you might need trousers and a top, and you might need a jacket. I don't even know the amount of pieces I made. Essentially, I had a month to do it, and I just sewed my life away for like, it was crazy. It was from the moment I woke up to the moment I fell asleep at night, I was sewing for a month. But it paid off, and we went to Fashion Week in September 2022. And again, it was another very humbling experience where I designed a bridal collection for short stature people. And the reason I did bridal was because I'd never seen it before, and it was a challenge, and I like a challenge, although sometimes I give myself too much of a challenge, and I probably shouldn't have been so ambitious. But yeah, I'd never seen it, and I thought, do you know what, that's really impactful. As much as it's impactful to have short stature models anyway, I want them to be wearing something that's beautiful and shocking. Like, I wanted to shock the audience. And again, it was another thing I hadn't appreciated until the day, was that I had 5 short stature models. They all had different forms of dwarfism or brittle bone. And a couple of them had said to me, do you know, I'd never even considered that I could wear a wedding dress, or I'd never even imagined myself in a wedding dress because I've never seen it. I didn't think it was possible. So again, it was another thing where I hadn't really appreciated the impact of what I was doing until the moment. But it was amazing and it was lovely. It was emotional for all the right reasons. And between myself and all the models, we were like a little family anyway. And I still would say we're all like a little family anyway. But yeah, very, very emotional. After they did their walk and everyone kind of claps, usually the designer does the little walk at the end with them. And I said, oh, no, I'm just going to stand here and watch. And when you could like hear the crowd clapping and like cheering, I just burst into tears and I was just a sobbing mess. It was, I was ugly crying. It was not like a little tear to wipe away. It was a full on sob. I think just probably partly exhaustion, to be fair.
Yeah. You've been sewing for a month, like it's all coming out.
And then again, the relief, like everything fit, people felt great. I could see the difference it had made to them and their lives. And I knew long term that this would make a difference in their lives. One, just having the experience of Fashion Week anyway. Two, the experience of wearing a wedding dress and knowing it's possible now. And also the fact that the crowd really did appreciate it. That, of course, London Represents is so inclusive anyway. They have models of all kinds of conditions and people that present in all kinds of different ways. However, you don't expect 5 models to come down the runway who are an average of 4 foot tall. So I was so pleased that the audience loved it. And anyone who was there on the day would tell you that they cheered the loudest for us. I think that's because it was so emotional and because models are typically very serious. You have to have a serious face, you do a serious pose, you have a serious walk. Whereas for our models, it was just fun and they were smiling and they were like twirling and just like having the best time. So it was amazing. And that was the moment where Dewey then went from being a brand for people with dwarfism to a brand for people under 5 foot. And that really developed from there.
Yeah. I love that, you know, the crowd were just so like overjoyed with what you did, because actually you're right. And when I think particularly about bridal fashion, you're right. I've never seen a woman, or like a guy, if he wants to wear a dress, he can do whatever he wants. But I've never seen, when we're thinking about bridal fashion, I've never seen dwarfism ever represented. And actually, it's really interesting what you say about how someone had said, you know, I didn't even know if I would be able to wear a wedding dress, because I know that conversation, not particularly surrounding like wedding dresses, but particularly surrounding weddings for disabled people is a very, very interesting topic. Because I had a chat with Ashley Eakin a very long time ago, and I remember her saying to me, I didn't even know if I could ever get married because I'd never seen a disabled woman in a wedding dress. And the fact that you've been able to create these dresses and then provide that representation for someone is phenomenal, because there's going to be a young person with dwarfism out there who's then seen those dresses and seen the women in those dresses, who realize that they can also have the exact same fairy tale wedding that, you know, we're promised as little girls. That can happen for them now. And that is incredible, because you're right, that representation isn't there, but you provided that moment for it to be there.
Yeah, 100%. And that is the important thing, isn't it? It's that if nothing else, if all I'm doing is showing the next generation of young people who are growing up with short stature that it is possible, and that they can be models, or they can be in fashion, and they can do, I don't know, certain careers because now the clothing exists for them, then that's so important to just give people that hope, if nothing else.
Yeah. So with Dewey, what are the plans for the future with Dewey?
So very exciting. Long term, I want Dewey to be the place that you think of when you're short stature. So we know of, I always compared to something like Long Tall Sally. We know that if you're tall, you can shop at Long Tall Sally. Although I think it's only women's wear, but let's say if you're a tall woman or female presenting, you can shop at Long Tall Sally if you are tall. And they have shoes, and I think they also have accessories and things. They have clothing that looks like clothing from everywhere else. That's essentially what I want Dewey to be, but for small people. And I always oversimplify what we do, but essentially what we're doing is we're providing clothing that looks like clothing from anywhere else. It's just smaller. It really is. It's not that simple, I can tell you, but it is that simple as a concept. So that's long term. That's the goal, is just to be the place that's recognised globally for short stature people. Because another thing I've learned very recently is that there's so many more short stature people than I even thought, that I even knew. Again, because the research is not there. There's not a place you can Google how many short stature people in the world. I've done it multiple times. There's no answer.
Doesn't exist.
No, there's no answer. However, I've done lots of research, and from what I can find, it's roughly 2.5 billion people under 5 foot globally, which is a big chunk. That's like I don't know what the fraction is in my brain. That's like maybe a fifth of the whole world, let's say.
It's roughly a fifth of the world's population.
Yeah, it's not a small number. It's a big number. It's a big chunk of people. And they deserve clothing. I don't know why it's taken this long. I think that about 100 years ago, that's when the whole industry become industrialized. Before then, we all made our own clothing, so it was never an issue. We made it ourselves. Whereas then we went from making clothing ourselves to going to a shop to buy it. That's when short stature people have been left behind. So I think we're about 100 years behind, and I just want to be that person to provide good clothing for people.
Yeah. Also, why shouldn't you? Because you've been the person that's gone out there and actually collected and collated this research, and I personally can't think of anything better. Like, why would you not do it if you could?
I know. And I do also say as well, like, I know we've spoken briefly about allyship, but I very much appreciate that I don't have the struggles that my customers do, and that gives me, they call it an unfair advantage in business. My unfair advantage is that I don't struggle with this, so I don't have the emotional drain of dealing with it every day. And if people do have, if there are barriers, I don't have the emotional baggage that I also then face. That I have the strength to move past a lot of these things. So why would I not use that for good? Like, why would I not use this extra emotional room, let's say, by not facing these issues every day? I'm not the one that goes out there and faces staring every day, and I'm not the one that faces all of the extra barriers. Why would I not spend that time doing something good with it when I can?
I honestly couldn't love that more, because I think what you said about having extra emotional room is actually kind of imperative, particularly when we're talking about business, because you do need a bit more of that emotional space. You need that buffer room, because if you're too emotionally attached to something, that's when things tend to not go so well. But actually you do have that level of being removed from the experience, which, is it a positive, is it a negative, or it's kind of neither, actually, because on one hand you're able to help where you can, but equally you're removed from it, so you're not experiencing the day-to-day atrocities as such, because you're not directly there. But actually, in terms of business, in terms of what that means that you can then do to help people, is elevated, which I think is actually kind of perfect.
I can never say I've got the lived experience, and I could never even comprehend it fully, but I can learn, and I can be a sponge, and I can listen to people, and I can take in as much information as possible and then work with that. And I think just being a good listener is just something that we all need anyway, but I think in business it's really useful. It's just to listen to people and just to take into consideration what they say and what they feel, and then work with that. Like I said before, I just listen and then I work with it, and it's just a cycle of that constantly. We don't stop learning. The same as if I did have a certain condition, it doesn't mean that I know everything about it today, and that's never going to change. Because that's another thing that I bring up a lot of the time when people do question, like, why are you doing it of all people? And I say, well, even if I did have, I don't know, let's say I had cerebral palsy and I was short stature, just because I had this condition doesn't mean I know everything about it. And it doesn't mean that my experience is the same as the next person with the same condition. So not what's the difference, because there is a difference obviously, but what's then to say that someone who doesn't have a disability can learn and still help? It's not, I think it's different if I was going into this and I was saying I'm going to save people, I'm going to be a bit of a white saviour, and I'm going to change the world, and you can all thank me for it. I think that would be different, but I think I'm just someone who's very inquisitive, and I love to learn and I love to listen and do something with it. I think it really would just depend on how people did it would be the issue with if someone did it who wasn't disabled.
I really like that, because I think for a lot of disabled people, sometimes when we're talking about allyship, quite often it can be performative, and that's the same for any allyship, for any, you know, what's the word that I'm looking for?
Marginalised communities?
That's literally the words that I was looking for. For any marginalised community, it doesn't matter. Quite often, you know, allyship, particularly when we think around social media, how people present themselves on social media, 9 times out of 10, you know, allyship is performative. And when you think about, would you actually be in the trenches with us? Quite often the answer is no, because whilst you can see it, you don't want to be a part of it. But therefore, by not being a part of it, you're actually you're exacerbating the problem. You're not putting yourself in the trenches, and therefore you're letting it happen. But actually, I really like what you say about, you know, you don't have the lived experience, but you're always willing to listen and learn. And I think a lot of people don't like to listen and learn, and particularly when we're talking about disability, because it's not always the easiest of conversations to have. Like, it isn't always the easiest thing, and I'm sure that you've had some moments where, you know, you might have thought you yourself had a great idea, and actually someone, you know, who it has dwarfism has turned around and been like, babe, that's shit. Like these moments exist, but actually, rather than being uncomfortable about them, it's about growing from them. And I really like what you said about that, about how you're not the white knight, you're not here to save everyone, but if you can provide a service, then that's great. But equally, there are troubles in that as well. It's not all just plain sailing, and I think that's what makes us human, and it makes allyship a bit more human rather than performative, which is lovely.
And also, if I really, again, I always simplify what I do, but it makes it easier to build a picture. If we completely simplify Dewey and everything Dewey stands for, we're just providing clothing that fits. So if that's all I ever do, and if all I do is give someone clothing that fits and is comfortable, then fab. However, I know from everything I've learned and witnessed is that there's a much larger issue around representation and how people feel about themselves and self-esteem and all kinds of things. I know that all comes into what I do. But if we just simplify it, we're just making good clothes, really. So fabulous if we have all of the extras that make people feel great, and we improve representation and all of those things. If we can do that through clothing, then why not?
I love that attitude. Like, why not? I think I have a very similar attitude. Like why not? Why would we not? It doesn't make sense to not do it.
And why not try? It could absolutely fail, and perhaps those 2.5 billion people decide they'd rather shop in the children's section. I'm sure it's not the case. If that happened, then fair enough. We pivot, we look at something else, and we look at other ways we can help, or we look at, I would never look at other communities now, I don't think. I think people would be very mad at me if I then started saying, I always used to joke about it. Imagine if I just turned around and said, do you know what? I'm going to make clothes for tall people instead. All the small people would be outraged. But
I just don't think it would work the same.
It just wouldn't. It just really wouldn't hit the same. But yeah, why not? Why not try it? Why not give it our best shot and do everything we can? And I always think as well, if it absolutely failed, then I've met some amazing people and I've had some of the best experiences. And I know that I've improved people's lives in some way, even if it's one person who got to experience Fashion Week and it changed their perception of themselves or whatever it might be. If nothing else, I've had a great time doing it.
So this actually ties in so nicely to my next question, which is, have you got a piece of advice for a younger version of yourself?
For a younger version of myself, I think I don't know if it'd be advice, but I think I'd like to reassure my younger self that it'll be fine, that like I can do what I want to do and that it will be fine. Because I think I grew up in a very low socioeconomic background, let's say, and I went to a school with quite a lot of rich people. Where we lived, there were lots and lots of rich people who had horses, and I don't know, used to go on fancy holidays, and we lived in a council house, and I don't know, I think our only holiday was like a caravan park when I was like 8 years old or something, I don't know. So growing up, I definitely used to kind of have the fear of like, I knew I was a very ambitious person, and I knew I wanted to make fashion, and I knew I wanted to do certain things. And I think going back and being able to reassure myself that even if you come from that kind of background, you can still do it, I think that would have been really useful.
Yeah. And I love that actually, because I once read a quote and essentially it was along the lines of like, your background doesn't matter, but what you make of where you're from does matter. And I think that's really true. What you make of yourself, rather than, oh, my background means that I can't do this. Now, don't get me wrong. There are quite a lot of barriers to entry with that. And there are a lot of issues that come up with that systemically. So I get that. But actually, you know, if there's something that you really want to go after, then you should go after it regardless of where you're from or what you do.
Yeah. Also, like, I try and always think with like a cup half full than half empty anyway. And I think if I look back at that experience and growing up and the different experiences I had, that has positively impacted me and positively helped me, because one, I'm way more empathetic than some other people, because I've just dealt with a lot of crap myself. While it's not the same, and I know it's not the same, I can appreciate difficulty. But also I'm so resilient because I've been through certain things. So then when I face things now, I'm like, oh, well, I've done whatever before, so this is just another thing to get past. So I've had that privilege of learning and using kind of hardship to help me. So I always see that as a positive, that had I have grown up with a silver spoon in my mouth, as they say, would I be this resilient? Probably not. And would I have been this determined? Probably not. I probably would have taken easy routes, and I would have got to, I don't know, let's say the barrier of size chart just doesn't exist. Perhaps I would have thought, okay, I'm not going to do it then. Whereas instead, I've had to overcome so many things, so that was just another thing to overcome.
Yeah, that was just like another hurdle to get over, rather than going, no, I'm not even going to jump.
Yeah. So I think I mean, there's positives in everything. I like to see everything as a lesson, and that kind of background has suited me well, because like I say, I've built empathy so much and compassion, and I'm just so much more resilient and determined that it's almost like there's no way, I always say there's no way this would fail anyway, but I wouldn't even let it. Like, I just wouldn't. I get every barrier and I'm like, no, we've got to do something else. Like, it just wouldn't fail. I wouldn't let it.
My final question, and now usually this would be, are you disabled and proud? But you're not disabled, so therefore you can't really answer the question. But what I will ask you is if you're a proud disabled ally.
Yeah, 100%. It's like one of my proudest badges to wear.
Yeah. I have loved this conversation. I've loved learning about what you do and about how you've collated your information and all about Dewey, because I think it's so needed. And I just want to say thank you for being my first non-disabled guest.
You're very welcome. Well, I'm honoured to be your first ally instead of disabled person. And like I said at the beginning, I love talking about Dewey anyway. And I love getting to discuss kind of the journey, and hopefully some of your listeners would have learned something new, because as much as we can all be sponges and we can learn so much about disability, there's always something that you don't know. So
I learn something new every single episode without a shadow of a doubt. And like, I've been doing this for a while now, so that's a lot of new things that I've learned. You literally, I think I still must learn something new every day from the community and things I do. So I've really enjoyed it. So thank you for having me.